It's fair to say that the critical drinker hated Midsommar. Now he's a swell guy, he's really funny, he can hold his booze, and he makes really great points in every review. He was never taken in by Jordan Peele's BS, and he called out those films for their objective flaws. But the guy is wrong about Midsommar, and I'm going to show you why. And it all starts with this moment here. I'm going to be assuming a certain knowledge of Midsommar here, because this is going to be pretty spoilerful, okay? So before entering the main setting for the story, the Swedish commune in Helsingör, the main characters agree to take a shroom trip together. They really insist on coordinating that trip, saying they have to take the same trip. Now this is important. This is an invitation to us, the audience, to go along with them. So the writer and director, Ari Aster, is saying, if you don't go on the trip with them, that is, if you don't disrupt your rational perception, reliance on logic, and fully immerse yourself in the experience, then Midsommar is going to look like a steaming pile of brainless bilge water. Now, Critical Drinker is completely correct. The characters do act illogically, they do behave bizarrely, and they ignore big red flags. Of course they do, no fight here. But that's beside the point. Like Ari Aster's horror debut Hereditary, Midsommar is much more of an experience. It is removed from a typical horror film and, well, a typical film generally. Midsommar is much more of a multi-sensory experience that you have to really willingly embrace to get the most out of it. It's much more in line of the tradition of films by directors like Gaspar Noé, Nicholas Winding Refn, David Lynch especially, and even Stanley Kubrick to an extent when you consider stuff like Eyes Wide Shut. Verisimilitude isn't really the standard that you want to hold them to. Now, I'm not saying, bro, it's cool, turn off your brain and lower your standards. I'm absolutely not saying that. And Critical Drinker is really right when he says this.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. Having deep themes or social commentary in your film means nothing if your screenplay is a steaming turd that makes no sense.
Now, he would be completely right about Midsommar if Midsommar was aiming for realism, but it's not, and it really telegraphs that to you. You just can't apply that standard here. It's like going to the ballet and complaining that no one's learnt their lines. Movies like Us, Get Out, and Black Christmas are objectively bad movies because they fail their own logical standards so that they can hammer you with their 95 theses. Midsommar isn't doing that. It's telling you from the very start, we're going to a really weird place and I want you to come along on that journey. With that established, let's get another bad take on Midsommar out of the way. Midsommar is not the modern Wicker Man. You're thinking of The Apostle, which actually was pretty darn good. I highly rate it, actually. Now, I think Ari Aster threw in this bearsuit thing specifically to rebut people making that really obvious comparison. Nicolas Cage wearing the bearsuit in the Wicker Man remake was just pure meme fodder, obviously. And I can only see this as Ari Aster sort of throwing it back at people who bring it up as a point of comparison. And I think he's probably laughing at you if your analysis ends there. I mean, if you want a kind of take on it, let's say we're all laughing at the Wicker Man remake together, okay? So I'd very much like to give my own take on Midsommar here, because I don't think it's just a really good modern folk horror. I think it is a bit deeper than that. It's, I would say, a reaction to a reaction. It's a counter-reaction. When I watch Midsommar, I see it as preempting the rejection of modernity. And to Ari Aster's credit, it's pretty darn balanced about that. So why would I think that? What is the rejection of modernity and why is it in a modern folk horror film? In brief, modernity is not delivered on its promises. We aren't living in the world of the Jetsons. We aren't living in a hyper-efficient paradise where technology has liberated men from crippling physical labour and everyone works no more than 10 hours a week. Those were the ideas bouncing around the late 19th and 20th century. History didn't end with the victory of glorious global liberal democracy as Francis Fukuyama was predicting in the mid-90s. We don't have beautiful enlightened opera houses in Somalia and weekend trips to Mars. We have beheadings in Paris and drag queen story hour. So far, so doomer. Understandably, many people are looking at modernity and asking, is this it? Particularly after a year of lockdown and restrictions, you get tempted to reject it all. You know, people spend their hard-earned money and very limited annual leave to go into quiet rural ideals, and then trudge back to the megalopolis. And that repeatedly revealed preference is maybe showing a desire to return to something a lot more simple, natural, and traditional. I mean, maybe that's just the village girl in me talking, I don't know. So I think Midsommar is preemptively examining that instinct to reject modernity, to return to nature and to tradition. And I think the film wants to raise some of the harsher realities of returning to a more traditional, lower-tech, rural culture and get you to ask yourself whether you would really be happier here or back in the megalopolis of Tokyo 3 or Neo Tokyo. Whatever your weeb preference is, I don't know. Weeb. Now, I don't think Ari Aster is really saying that one side is better than the other. It's more that he's showing that neither choice is without a darker side. Now, how does that fairly unconventional interpretation of Midsommar actually manifest in the film? The protagonist, Dani, embodies modernity. She's on the standard university path. She's accruing mountains of debt for a subject that she's so uninterested in that I don't think she ever mentions it in the film. She's unmarried, in a relationship so detached that the boyfriend forgets how long they've been dating, and you never even see them kiss. Basically, they're together by default. They're half in the traditional pattern, but they're undefined, formless, or uncommitted. His friends push him to leave her, but Christian is too emasculated to commit to either path. He lacks the courage to either commit and support Dani emotionally through her trauma, or walk away and give her back to her more supportive friends. This scene is absolutely key. It shows Dani wailing in distress and Christian is just stoic and cold. She has no connections. We don't see his family. Everyone here is just atomized individuals, studying something ultimately unimportant and getting into ridiculous debt for it. The scenes in modern cities are shot in dark, grim blues, and it is not a coincidence that Dani's family tragedy involves a car. The idea that this thing that was made to help us has actually ultimately caused a whole bunch of death. That is very important symbolism, and Ari Aster uses symbolism brilliantly and sometimes very subtly throughout the film, whether in the role of the car as a murder-suicide weapon or in this shot here. So this framing here makes Dani's situation very clearly. On Christian's left are a whole load of academic books, that is symbolising sticking with him with his academic plans, and on the right is the door. The choices follow him on his academic trip or leave. And then there's this car journey towards Helsinge, where the world is revolving, and it's very similar to, say, the start of Session 9, or how you enter the dark nightmare world in the original Silent Hill game. They're going into an upside-down world, a different reality. These are all to symbolise that they are leaving the regular world, and we shouldn't really think of things as going to proceed normally. Now, naturally, when he's dealing with the issues of modernity and why people might want to reject it, Ari Aster actually has to show the good side of the alternative. So Helsinge from the very start looks very idyllic. The tones here are really warm, it is consistently sunny. That's maybe quite a nice bit of a sly message, like the idea that the alternative is always going to be springtime. When they're being introduced around, it is a lovely setup. It's bright, it looks gorgeous, everyone knows everyone. It's simple, it's charming, it's wholesome. You see the vegetables being worked over here, you see the lovely lake. It's a beautiful commune, you can see the appeal. But also from the start you get these details that are there to make you question and start getting uneasy straight away. So you have in broad daylight the bear in the cage that they all take notice of, but Pele is just saying, oh, it's just a bear. That is your reminder that even the fairly pitiful excuse for animal rights we have at the moment is more of a modern invention, and that a certain amount of animal cruelty is quite endemic in more traditional societies. The absolute homogeneity of everyone who's in the commune, even down to sort of all white clothing, in contrast to all the visitors, may also be a little point of criticism from Ari Aster. That is, however, just more reflective of how Sweden is, so I don't know if it was intended to be a criticism or not, and even so people might not take it as criticism. You also see them struggling to sleep at night in the large barn, where they're kept awake by the sounds of children screaming all the time, which is, again, trying to bring back the reality of that traditional life that motherhood is tough, it is difficult, you will lose some sleep over it. And obviously one of the biggest challenges the film raises about the idea of that idyllic rural life is the ritual sacrifice of Atastupa. The Atastupa sacrifice ritual here, this is the breakthrough moment basically when the modern group's feigned respect for other cultures starts to fail. Yeah. That is not very inclusive, guys. This is too much for the visitors, and two of them make their minds up to leave right then. But the writer and director, Ari Aster, is not a hack, and he knows it's not so straightforward. So when the characters decry the barbarity and the arbitrary timing of the elder's self-sacrifice, Ari Aster has one interloper ask if it's better than what we do in care homes. I mean, consider that. Sit with that for a second and think it out. This moment is a point where you see the limitations and orthodoxies of the characters on full display. Now, when these modern visitors are decrying the barbaric ritual here and the barbaric society, a less subtle film might be tempted to point out that these characters likely support euthanasia themselves. It might also call out the society's factory farming, late-term abortions, lifelong imprisonments, foreign wars, police brutality, and then maybe ask what they mean by barbaric. Danny is the only one who doesn't look away during this ritual. She's drawn to the community even at its most brutal moment. But there is an even deeper point to this that's really important to grasp. For all the superficial gruesomeness, the Atastupa ritual is a moment of two citizens in the community making a sacrifice for the good of the group. Now, the modern characters, they just cannot comprehend that because they're completely blinkered by individualism, even though, of course, they unconsciously and ironically support the passive and social equivalent of this via, taxation and intense state control. These are different methods of the loss for the individual for the benefit of the group. Now, I'm not just on a Peter Hitchens-fueled rant here. I believe Ari Aster really does understand that point. Because at the end of Midsommar, Danny finds in Helsinger something that she couldn't find in the modern world: genuine connection, compassion, and community. This contrast in scenes is completely deliberate. In a modern society, she was crying on her own, and in this irrational, savage cult, she found connection and empathy. Now, contrary to the presuppositions of modernity, we aren't rational beings. And Danny embraces that. She finds joy and strength in the irrational traditions that give her a community and a home. After all, despite her seeming weakness at the start of the film, at the end she is surviving the dance to become the May Queen, and Aster focuses in on her grin as she exults in this uncovered strength. This is really good stuff. Now, Midsommar isn't a particularly scary film at all, but it did fascinate me. Ari Aster made a really balanced film. He doesn't idealise the anti-modernism of Helsinger, but he gets the appeal. I mean, he's also showing the irrationality, he's showing the suffering, I guess I would say exemplified by all the low-key animal suffering. But he also sees the isolation, meaninglessness and cruelty of modern liberal individualism. And in the canniest move of all, at the end of the film, Ari Aster trusts us to be horrified in a new way, to be subtly disturbed by Danny's decision to reject modernity and, with it, mainstream audience values. In conclusion, Midsommar's great, 9 out of 10.
Go away now!
Durango 95 poured away real horror show.